Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a look at the Fuji XC 50 to 230mm 4.5 to 6.7 OIS II and asking the question, is it good enough? Lately I've been asked about this lens a lot. I also see a lot of comments from people who I respect who say they've been really impressed with this lens, so I was intrigued and I decided I needed to shoot with it. To that end, I reached out to a friend at photosavings.com and I asked if I could borrow a copy of it just for that purpose, and they were super kind and sent me one. In addition to providing me the opportunity to bring you content, they are also offering a discount on all their gear, so you can check them out in the links below. So when I first heard people talking about this, I have to say I was skeptical. I hadn't really given the XC line of lenses a chance. They are cheaper, made of more affordable plastic materials in Philippines or in China rather than in Japan, and I really just didn't think that they'd be up to snuff. But I just kept hearing about this lens, so I've shot with this lens a lot over the last month. In fact, we were able to take this with us on a recent family vacation to San Diego, and other than some low light, tighter focal length situations, it stayed on my camera the whole trip. And now that I'm back and have been through all the images and all the testing, I definitely have some opinions about it. So we'll proceed like this. First, I'm going to tell you everything I like about this lens, then I'm going to tell you everything I do not like about it, and finally I'll tell you who I think this lens is for and who I think it is not for. So the first and most obvious win for this lens is that it is affordable. At 400 USD, it's not exactly cheap, but when you consider that it is a super telephoto zoom lens, it's definitely worth considering if it will work for your needs. And that's the next thing you have to say about this lens. The zoom range is incredible. I really needed the vacation we took to San Diego, and the thing I needed more than anything is just to sit on the beach in a chair and not move. But because I still really wanted to make photos and capture the magic of my kids and their cousins experiencing the ocean, this lens was absolutely perfect. From my lazy vantage point, I was able to capture all the action happening anywhere on the beach with very little effort, and it was really rewarding. The other thing I love about this lens is its weight. With all that zoom range, you'd expect it to be much weightier than it is, but if you compare it to the 50 to 140, for instance, it's quite a bit smaller and lighter, though when fully extended, it is roughly the same height. At almost 400 grams or 16 ounces, it's about the same weight as the 56 1.2. That makes it nice for packing around places. I didn't really mind having it with me when I visited SeaWorld. It's still a lot more inconvenient and less of an inspiring experience than slipping in an X100 series camera over your neck, sure, but it's hard not to love this zoom range when you don't want to miss any of the experiences regardless of how far away they are. Another thing I like about this lens is the optical image stabilization. Hand holding photos captured at the 230mm zoom distance would lead to some softness issues, particularly for a guy like me who doesn't have particularly steady hands. And of course, this lens is not a low light wonder, but hand holding it while shooting stationary objects in low light, a lot of limitations from the aperture can be compensated for by shooting at slower shutter speeds with a more steady lens. Finally, it's a very quiet lens, whereas some of the larger Fuji lenses with the stepping motors make me hesitate to use them for video, where I'll be using any sort of onboard or hot shoe mounted audio especially. This lens is extremely silent when focusing. So those are all the things I like about this lens. Let's talk about the bad. The first thing I was a little disappointed about with this lens was the lack of sharpness. I did a comparison of this lens versus all the other Fuji portrait lenses recently, and this lens was definitely last place. While it is actually very sharp at the 50mm end, especially when shooting around f8, once you move past 100mm, things start to go downhill. And looking at photos at the 230mm mark, you can see they are quite soft. Is it anything anyone will notice on social media? No, not at all. But if you plan on printing large or cropping a lot, it's probably something you will notice. Now, I recognize with any lens there are outlier copies, so I was sure to check other reviews and lens comparisons, and it did seem that what I observed here was also a pattern for other reviewers. When it comes to image quality, while I do appreciate that it has image stabilization, which allows you to get away with some slower handheld shutter speeds than you would be able to normally, which helps in low light, this lens is not great in low light. Its aperture speeds aren't low enough, and so So if you need to be able to shoot at night or indoors in poorly lit situations, this just isn't the right lens for you. It also focuses much more slowly in low light settings, and in fact, it's a slower focuser in general. In normal situations, the 50 to 230, if you average all my tests, which span infinity to close focus and then back, the 50 to 230 is probably somewhere between half a second and a quarter of a second slower focusing than the 50 to 140. However, focusing in low light is horrible. It took over 3 seconds on average for it to focus from infinity to close focus and from close focus back to near infinity in my tests at the long end. The short end was much faster though, at between half a second on the X-T2 and almost a full second on the X-T3 to reach near close focus from infinity in low light. The next thing I dislike about this lens is the build quality. I get that it needs to be made of some more plasticky and affordable materials, so it's completely expected, but things like this nice mold crease here down the center and the fact that it's all plasticky just takes away from the Fuji magic when it comes to using this lens. I was also actually pretty nervous having this lens with me on the beach. I was worried about getting sand in the zoom ring or inside of the zoom housing, although I did seem to come away without any issue. Additionally, I don't find it to be particularly enjoyable using the dial to control the aperture when I've had the pleasure of using aperture rings on the Fuji XF lenses for so long. Another thing to note about it, this could go either way. Some people do not like that it is a stiff zoom ring. You're not able to use just one finger to zoom. You kind of have to get a hold of it and really crank to get it to zoom. But others will say that's a good thing because the lens isn't going anywhere. That may actually be a benefit. I've also heard people complain that the plastic mount wiggles a little bit. I haven't really experienced that myself, but that's something to watch and be aware of. So that is my overview of the pros and cons of this lens. So lastly, let's talk about who this lens is for. And apparently this lens is for someone like me. Halfway through my San Diego trip, I realized that I absolutely loved having this lens with me for travel. I've never understood people who go on these long trips with their fixed focal length X100s or prime lens. Don't get me wrong, I much prefer Fuji primes to zooms in professional portraiture or even on the street and in street photography settings. But when I'm on vacation with my kids, I just never know what I'm gonna wanna capture, and I wanna maximize the flexibility I have. This lens totally rocked for that, and I just love the photos I was able to capture. I loved it so much, in fact, that halfway through my trip, I did reach out to my contact at photosavings.com who'd let me borrow it, and I asked if I could just buy it from him. When you couple this guy with a faster, wider prime for those low light situations, this is now fast becoming the family vacation, family adventure lens of choice for me. But what about wildlife photographers or sport photographers? Could it work in those settings? If you're an amateur or occasional hobbyist wildlife photographer on a budget, and if you're shooting in good light, yeah, sure, it could certainly work. The resolving power certainly can't compete with some of Fuji's other zoom lenses, and its focusing speeds aren't anything to write home about, but they can absolutely get the job done if you're not willing to shell out the big bucks. And for sports photographers, especially parents like me who want to be able to have that reach to really get in there and grab the action, you don't have to have a monopod to mount on this lens. You can hand hold it and get steady shots and do that all day. However, it's not for indoor sports or low light situations. When the sun starts to set, I go ahead and I put this lens away. There's just no use in keeping it out in those situations, both because it starts to struggle with autofocus and because the images are just gonna be too noisy. Guys, that's it for my thoughts on this guy. Am I glad I decided to review this lens? Absolutely. Is it a lens that I think deserves more attention? Yes, certainly. Is it for professionals? Maybe not, unless you're a professional on vacation. But either way, that's all I have to say about it for now. As always, I wish you all the best in your lens buying decisions, and more importantly, best of luck in your photography. Remember, kindness before cameras. We'll talk to you again real soon.